Today, we're looking into a case that's thankfully solved. However, some people think that there might be other culprits involved, and they may have evaded justice. I'm John Lordan, and today, we're looking into the Son of Sam case. Richard David Falco was born June 1st, 1953, and was given up for adoption days after his birth by his biological mother, Elizabeth Broder. Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz adopted the 3-week-old and raised the child in the Bronx, New York. Nathan owned and operated his own hardware store where he worked long hours 6 days a week. As a result, young David formed a tighter relationship with his mother, Pearl. In 1967, Pearl fell ill with breast cancer, and unfortunately she passed away. The loss hit the 14-year-old David Berkowitz hard, and the relationship with Nathan was strained over the following years when he took on a new wife. Soon after, David left home and joined the Army, where most of his 3 years of duty had him stationed in South Korea. He was discharged in 1974, and he returned to New York City, which was then dealing with high crime. The city was forced into a mass layoff of its police force, reducing their numbers by 5,000 officers and patrolmen. Fresh waves of violent crimes flooded the streets, and the force was just spread too thin to keep up with it all. With the backdrop of a city struggling with an epidemic of violence, David Berkowitz would embark on his own journey of rage. His activity would bring a term into the public mindset that hasn't left since: serial killer. On Christmas Eve 1975, David attacked 2 teenage females with a knife in Co-op City, the massive housing development located in the Bronx's northeast corner. Both of the young ladies thankfully survived that attack. Only one of them has been publicly identified. Her name, Michelle Foreman. David was never brought to justice for this crime, and he was never charged. This is the only time that Berkowitz used a knife, and being unhappy with the results of the attack, he then took a road trip to Texas to purchase a firearm. He struck next at a little past 1 a.m. on July 29, 1976. 2 young women sat in a parked car talking after a night out at a local discotheque. The passenger, an 18-year-old emergency medical technician named Donna Luria, opened the door and was exiting the car when a man approached. He dropped to one knee and fired a handgun. Donna was killed instantly with the first round, and a second shot struck the driver in the thigh, a 19-year-old nurse named Jody Valenti. A third shot was fired, but missed, and the shooter ran away from the scene. Valenti recovered, but Donna would not, scarring the Luria family forever. The shooter was described by Valenti as short and heavy-looking with curly black hair. Donna's father, Michael Angelo Luria, corroborated this description as he had seen a similar-looking individual sitting inside a yellow compact car, thought to be a Volkswagen Beetle, prior to the shooting. The crime was investigated, but there were no leads. There was no apparent motive, as the women weren't robbed or sexually assaulted. And among the ceaseless crime wave going on at that time, the Luria murder case stalled out. Overwhelmed detectives had no shortage of investigations pulling at their time and their focus. October 23, 1976. A couple was sitting in a car outside of a discotheque in Flushing, Queens. 20-year-old Carl Denaro was sitting in the passenger seat when an explosion erupted from his right. The driver, 18-year-old Rosemary Keenan, reacted quickly and drove away from the scene. Wounded only superficially by the flying glass, she unknowingly kept the unseen shooter from doing further harm. While it was clear Denaro was wounded, neither he nor Keenan knew that it was actually a gunshot to Denaro's skull, a wound that he would survive, with a metal plate inserted in the back of his skull, reminding him of the vicious attack for the rest of his life. This crime was also investigated, but police couldn't identify the caliber of the round as it was heavily deformed. It was thought that from its size, it might be a .45 caliber semi-automatic. Though the crime resembled the Luria murder, the connection had not yet been made, and no description of the gunman could be attained from Denaro or Keenan. Shortly after midnight on November 27th, 16-year-old Donna DeMasi and 18-year-old Joanne Lamino were standing in front of Lamino's Queens apartment building and talking when a man they described as being in his 20s approached. He pretended to ask for directions, and then he opened fire with a revolver. He shot each of the girls once. He also hit the apartment building with further gunfire, and then he ran away. DeMasi was struck in the neck, but would fully recover. Lamino suffered a severe spinal injury, paralyzing her for life. Again, this shooting seemed random. There was no apparent motivation to the crime, and the description of the gunman, this one being of a man in his 20s, tallish and blonde, would later prove to not be a match to sketches made from the Loria murder. The shooting spree continued on January 30th, 1977, when a gunman attacked a couple sitting in a Pontiac Firebird parked in Forest Hills, Queens. Again, the shooter attacked from the passenger side, shattering the glass with the first shot and putting two more into 26-year-old Christine Freund. Her fiancé, John Deal, 30 years old at that time, sped away from the scene before the gunman could get off any more rounds. Freund was struck in the head by both rounds and died in the hospital a few hours later. Deal could not provide a description of their assailant. Police dug a third bullet from the Firebird's dashboard and compared it to others retrieved from the other crime scenes. Ballistics experts discovered that the rounds were .44 specials and likely fired by the same gun, though that couldn't be conclusively proven at that time. Given the difference in the sketches between the Loria murder and the DeMasi-Lamino shooting, police considered the possibility that there was more than one gunman. March 8th, 7 p.m., Virginia Voskerikian, a 19-year-old college student, was walking alone on a sidewalk in Forest Hills, Queens, when she was approached. She sensed danger and had time to raise her textbooks to cover her face. It unfortunately didn't help. The single round fired passed through the books with enough force left over to kill Virginia. On March 10th, 1977, New York City Mayor Abraham Beame held a live televised press briefing where he announced that these crimes were all connected by the use of the same caliber bullet, the .44 Special. The local newspapers, radio, and television stations picked up the story, labeling the murderer as the .44 caliber killer. Word spread throughout the city that a serial killer was on the loose, preying mostly upon dark-haired young women. Many women chose to put their hair up, cut it short, dye themselves blonde, and some even opted to just not go out at all. The fear of the .44 caliber killer altered the nightlife in New York City. Even amongst the widespread fear and heightened police activity, the .44 caliber killer found no shortage of targets. The Bronx, April 17th, 3 a.m. Valentina Suriani, 18 years old, and Alexander Esau, 20 years old, were ambushed by a gunman as they sat in their car parked on the Hutchinson River Parkway service road. Valentina received one shot and Alexander two, both victims hit in the head. She died behind the wheel almost instantly. He would pass away in the hospital some hours later. However, this attack was different. The shooter was especially accurate, firing 3 times and fatally striking his victims with each shot from the .44 Special. The assailant was at ease enough to also leave a note in the car. It was addressed to NYPD Captain Joseph Borelli, the chief of detectives for the Queens Homicide Squad. The writer of the letter rambled in stark, blocky printed letters stating that he was not to be described as a woman hater, but instead he said, "I am a monster. I am the Son of Sam." Another Son of Sam letter was sent to a Daily News columnist that covered the case named Jimmy Breslin on May 30th. This one was also a long, rambling, cryptic message. The writer mentions accomplices that would provide future doubt on the number of shooters involved in the spree, unknown characters named the Duke of Death, the Wicked King Wicker, the 22 Disciples of Hell, and lastly, John Wheaties. The letter also contained a veiled threat that Son of Sam would commemorate the anniversary of the Loria murder in some way. Quote, "Tell me, Jim, what will you have for July 29th?" The media frenzy intensified. The letter to Breslin was forwarded to police, who noted a drastic difference in the tones and qualities between the letters to Borelli and the letters to Breslin. This further fed the fears that Son of Sam was more than one shooter, or he or they could literally be anyone at all, wandering the streets of the Bronx and Queens. Shortly after the receipt of these letters, the NYPD Son of Sam task force was created, and hundreds of officers and patrolmen were assigned to it. It was called the Omega Squad, or sometimes Omega Task Force. Despite this increased police pressure, Son of Sam struck again on June 26th, 3 a.m. in Bayside, Queens, just outside of a club called Alephus. 20-year-old Sal Lupo and 17-year-old Judy Placido were sitting inside Lupo's car when rapid gunfire erupted. Judy was hit 3 times, once to the head, another to the neck, and one to the shoulder. Lupo was struck once in the arm. Both survived the attack, but they didn't see their attacker. However, witnesses spotted a dark-haired man running from the scene. It was around this time when Yonkers resident Craig Glassman, a volunteer sheriff's deputy for the Westchester County Sheriff's Office, received a threatening letter from someone claiming to be Son of Sam. These letters were written in a scrawling longhand and called the deputy Cruel Craig, and they threatened the man with death. As the media focused on the Son of Sam letter that threatened another murder to occur on the anniversary of the Donna Lauria attack, fear in the streets peaked. The citizens of New York City, interviewed by television reporters, voiced their fears and reluctance to go out at night. Then, as if the city were a boxer beaten against the ropes, the lights went out on July 13th. The New York City blackout of 1977 led to looting, arson, and violence in the streets throughout that first night and into the next day. The summer heat and the pent-up horror that the Son of Sam wrought exploded, and the resulting spike in the crime wave would not abate until the power was fully restored to the city the night of the 14th. July 29th came and went with no sign of the Son of Sam, but the promised violent attack was looming. It happened instead on the night of the 31st, this time in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Again, in a car, a blonde-haired Stacy Moskowitz and her date, Robert Violante, were fired upon, and both 20-year-olds were struck in the head by the .44 special rounds. Stacy would later die in the hospital, and Robert lost his left eye. This time, Berkowitz made a mistake. He parked his cream-colored 1970 Ford Galaxy 500 next to a fire hydrant, and it had received a parking ticket. He was seen by a witness removing the ticket from the wiper blades, putting him at the scene. David paid the fine by check the next day. NYPD detectives investigating the Moskowitz-Violante shootings noted the timing of the parking ticket and placed it high on the list of things to investigate. On August 6th, a bucket full of gunpowder and .22 caliber bullets was placed on Craig Glassman's front stoop, set ablaze. This time, Glassman filed a complaint against his upstairs neighbor, a man named David Berkowitz. Police arrived at Glassman's home and asked him an unexpected question. "Are you David Berkowitz?" Glassman identified himself as a deputy and indicated that Berkowitz lived upstairs. The NYPD located David's Ford, entered it without a warrant, and found a Tommy gun on the rear floor amongst the trash strewn about the interior. A letter written in block-cased letters was found describing a planned mass shooting at a Long Island discotheque. It seemed that the NYPD had arrived just in time. They waited outside the apartment, keeping the Ford Galaxy in sight. When Berkowitz came outside that night, Glassman and the NYPD detectives closed in. David got in his car and he started the engine, but he got no further. Son of Sam was finally caught and arrested. Police searched his apartment and found a journal, which directly implicated Berkowitz in being the arsonist behind some 1,400 fires, many of which occurred near his Yonkers apartment. During police interrogation, David Berkowitz created the story of his being told what to do by a demonically possessed dog named Sam. More importantly, He confessed to all of the murders and shootings. Therefore, there was no trial. He pled guilty, and he was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. Despite that, some people question if Berkowitz was actually the only one responsible. In the 1987 book, The Ultimate Evil, journalist Maury Terry wrote about the possible ties between Berkowitz and a satanic cult called the Process Church of the Final Judgment, a UK-based cult which is rumored to have ties with Charles Manson. According to Terry, Berkowitz fell in with the Carr brothers, Michael and John, in 1975. Their father was Sam Carr, and the family dog was named Harvey. Berkowitz mashed up these factors into his creation of the Son of Sam moniker and did mention a John Wheaties in his letter to police. The Wheaties nickname was given to John Carr because of their sister's name, Wheat. Michael Carr, whom David had met at a party in 1975, was a heavy influence on David, who was dragged into the Satan-worshipping cult calling themselves the Children. It's said that the group gathered in Untermeyer Park and Gardens, located in Yonkers, where they carried out sacrifices of dogs. In the Maury Terry interview for Inside Edition in 1993, Berkowitz shockingly revealed that while he was present at all of the shootings, his fellow devil worshippers took turns with the gun and were also active arsonists. David admitted to the first of the attacks, the Donna Lauria, Jody Valenti shootings, and to killing Valentina Suriana and her boyfriend Alexander Esau. But he claimed that he was not the trigger man for the rest of the Son of Sam shootings. In that interview, Maury Terry proposes that brothers John Wheaties Carr and Michael Carr were among those cult members that committed the other killings. Berkowitz indicated that this was correct, and that it was a satanic priestess that had carried out the attack on Carl Denaro and Rosemary Keenan. But to this day, he won't name her or any other co-conspirators. Frustratingly, these allegations cannot be proven, as the Carr brothers died in separate incidents shortly after Berkowitz's arrest. John was found shot to death in North Dakota, possibly having ended his own life, and Michael met his end in a violent car crash in New York. The imprisoned David Berkowitz turned to Christianity in 1987 and is currently incarcerated at the Shawangunk Correctional Facility in New York. In the many interviews that David Berkowitz has done over the years, he generally refers to the murders and shootings as the tragedy or those things that happened, and states that he's no longer the same David Berkowitz that contributed to those crimes. David also wishes to be able to go back in time and prevent those horrible crimes. Though parole hearings are held for David about every 2 years, he tells the board that he should not be allowed out of prison. He even occasionally skips the parole hearings altogether. The influence of Maury Terry's book and those of other journalists that support a multiple shooter theory in the Son of Sam case led to its being reopened by Queens District Attorney John Santucci in 1979, but to date there have been no additional charges. Carl Denaro, who was shot in the head in 1976 but lived to tell the tale, met Maury Terry, and the two not only became friends, but Carl assisted in Terry's investigations. Carl believes that David Berkowitz did not shoot him, and he embraces the theory that the satanic priestess pulled the trigger. He's now in his mid-60s and has recently written a book about the incident. David Berkowitz uses an electric typewriter to communicate with pen pals. One of these pen pals is the daughter of Craig Glassman, the sheriff's deputy that was on hand when the NYPD arrested Berkowitz. Shayna Glassman has gone so far as to visit Berkowitz. The two consider themselves friends, despite others in the Glassman family warning her that her father, who was killed in a car accident in 1991, would certainly disapprove. Maury Terry was said to be obsessed with the Son of Sam case, and he went on many television shows to perpetuate his theory of the satanic cult involvement. He went to his grave solidly believing that Berkowitz did not act alone, and that there are members of the Children still out there. Maury passed away on December 10th, 2015. After his arrest, Berkowitz first claimed that a talking dog named Sam, possessed by the devil, told him to carry out the shootings, and that he acted alone. He later claimed that he conjured up this tale, and it may have been an attempt to convince authorities that he was insane. In the Maury Terry interviews, Berkowitz stated that he did not act alone, but why hasn't David volunteered the names of the others involved? Why are the witness sketches of the shooters in each case vastly different? If the children didn't really exist, what explains the deaths of John Wheaty's car and his brother Michael? Could there be other members of the children still wandering the streets of New York City? Or could their existence just be another tall tale, like that of a talking demon dog named Sam? This case not only brought terror to citizens of New York when the Son of Sam killings were occurring, but the aftermath would bring a change that would ripple across the nation and affect numerous other criminal cases. To learn more about that, please join us next week for the premiere of Criminal Impact. And of course, in 2 weeks, we'll be back with another story for you that I know you'll find seriously mysterious. If you're enjoying this show, please check out Seriously Mysterious, the podcast. We have over 150 episodes waiting for you.